And as the shuttle program matured, so it seemed did relationships between the world's spacefaring nations. On STS-47, the 50th Space Shuttle mission saw the orbiter Endeavour back in space on September 12, 1992. The mission was a cooperative space lab venture between Japan and the United States that brought the first Japanese astronaut into orbit as a member of the 7-person shuttle crew.
The Space Shuttle has launched people from different nations around this world that used to feel they could never, ever work together. And it has ushered us from the Cold War to this really cooperative space program that we have with our international partners, including the former Soviet Union.
Regardless of what language you speak and love space, and that's pretty cool. We have a lot in common with engineers and scientists around the world, and that's kind of fun to work in a program like this.
On February 3, 1995, Eileen Collins, the first woman to pilot a shuttle, was at the helm as Discovery gave the U.S. its first up-close look at the Mir space station. Collins flew the shuttle through a series of intricate maneuvers, approaching within 37 feet of the Russian spacecraft, and later performing a fly-around by hand.
And liftoff of the Space Shuttle Atlantis on a mission that will herald a new day of international cooperation in space.
4 months later, on June 27, 1995, Shuttle Atlantis would lift off from the Kennedy Space Center to begin STS-71, the U.S. space program's 100th human space mission. It would take 2 more days before Atlantis caught up with and performed the first shuttle docking with the Mir space station.
Houston, Atlantis, we have capture.
Orbiting 220 miles above the Earth, a most unique and historic celebration took place as the Mir space station welcomed its first American guests. Cosmonauts and astronauts together broke figurative bread, tortillas and fruit to be exact, in a renewed spirit of cooperation. Together, Shuttle and Mir formed the largest flying spacecraft the world had yet to see. It tipped the scales at 250 metric tons, more than 500,000 pounds. Between 1994 and 98, the Shuttle Mir program would involve 11 shuttle missions, including in 1996, STS-76, which began a continuous U.S. presence aboard the Russian space station with a visit by Atlantis. Barely fluent in Russian, astronaut Shannon Lucid, a biochemist, embarked upon a mission that would dramatically enhance our understanding of life in space. When she finally landed at Edwards Air Force Base on Shuttle Atlantis, she held the female space endurance record for spending 188 days in orbit. A hero's welcome was in store.
I'm here to say welcome home to Shannon Lucid.
By the time Shuttle Mir ended with STS-91, 7 American astronauts had completed extended stays aboard the Russian space station.
Tatiana Mativa, who I became very good friends with, and I remember us sitting in Red Square having dinner together with a full moon, and remembering when I was a child all those parades, those May Day parades with the tanks going by, and here we were sitting there having a nice dinner under the full moon and with a lot of friendship. So it just goes to show how space can unite people, and that's I think one of the biggest benefits.
8 cosmonauts had flown to Mir on the U.S. shuttle, and NASA astronaut Norm Thagard had become the first American to fly there or anywhere aboard a Soyuz spacecraft. In 2001, 15 years after its commissioning, Mir would be abandoned to break up and burn in Earth's atmosphere. By then, the process of building upon Mir's legacy of international cooperation in space had already begun. A Russian Proton rocket departs the Baikonur Cosmodrome in Kazakhstan, carrying the Zarya module, the first component of the new International Space Station.
Liftoff of the Proton rocket and the Zarya control module. The International Space Station is underway.
2 weeks after that, Space Shuttle Endeavour follows up with delivery of America's Unity module, the second piece of this largest space station puzzle ever to be constructed.
Houston Endeavour, we have capture of Zarya.
Not until July 2000 will the Russian Zvezda module be added, finally allowing for 2 Russian cosmonauts and their American Expedition 1 commander, Bill Shepard, to journey aboard a Soyuz spacecraft to the International Space Station and begin humankind's continuous extraterrestrial presence.
Across the world, people are very, very interested in and delighted by the International Space Station and the science that has taken place there.
Since only an orbiter's payload bay could hold the station's largest components, the multi-year, multi-mission building, outfitting, and servicing of the ISS with cargo and crew would become primarily a job for the shuttle. Amid these dynamic station-building missions, one seemingly simple and relatively uncomplicated flight would prove problematic and threaten the very future of America's human spaceflight program. STS-107 seemed to be a mission out of sorts. By the time Columbia was finally ready to fly on January 16, 2003, its planned 16-day mission had been delayed no fewer than 18 times. All those delays had ultimately positioned the STS-107 as a sort of black sheep on the Space Shuttle program's launch schedule. Columbia's crew commander Rick Husband, pilot Willie McCool, and mission specialists Michael Anderson, Kalpna Chawla, Dave Brown, Laurel Clark, and Israeli astronaut Ilan Ramon would not go to the International Space Station. Their flight would require nothing more risky than orbiting the Earth.
Booster ignition and liftoff of Space Shuttle Columbia with a multitude of national and international space research experiments.
82 seconds after launch, what was later described as a suitcase-sized chunk of frozen foam insulation breaks off Columbia's external tank and strikes the leading edge of the orbiter's left wing.
Roger, roll, Columbia.
A routine same-day video review of the launch would reveal nothing unusual. However, higher resolution tracking camera film processed overnight and reviewed on flight day 2 by the mission's ascent team showed otherwise.
You saw this little thing float toward the leading edge of the wing and like, it was like a snowball hitting something and then just being pulverized. But when you saw it hit, we just winced because we knew, the vehicle's going 500 miles an hour or better. It was inconceivable in hindsight that you could have that kind of impact at the speed that the vehicle was going and assume that there was no damage. And that's what we allowed ourselves to feel comfortable that we were right and we were dead wrong.
Due to limitations in the visual clarity, the exact point of impact and extent of any damage could not be determined. If the foam strike had compromised Columbia's integrity, little, if anything, could be done to repair the orbiter in space. 1 week after launch, Mission Control emails the crew, informing them of the debris strike. Save for a relatively minor problem with a leaky refrigeration unit, STS-107 had been without further incident.
Well, that display stopped updating. In other words, the display froze in a certain position. Well, sometimes you have loss of data, you have some problem with the system on the ground where you'll have those kind of outages temporarily. Well, this lasted a bit longer. Then the call went up to the crew. A call went up and no response. Well, I don't know, I just began to feel uneasy.
Columbia, Houston, UHF comm check.
At speeds above Mach 20, the stress becomes too much for the orbiter.
We do not have any balance data at this time.
The suitcase-sized chunk of foam had indeed punched a bowling ball-sized hole in the leading edge of Columbia's left wing. Within seconds, internal temperatures spike, signaling the cascade of structural disintegration. Only 16 minutes from home, Space Shuttle Columbia breaks apart in the skies over East Texas. All 7 crew members are lost.
GC flight. Flight GC, block the doors. Copy.
And at that moment, I knew we lost him.
I was sent out to David Brown's parents' home. I'll never forget this moment when Judge Brown looked at me and said, "Leland, my son is gone. There is nothing you can do to bring him back. But the biggest tragedy would be if you don't continue to fly and carry on his legacy."
Each of the remaining 3 orbiters was pulled apart and refurbished. New capabilities were devised for the crew and mission controllers to assess and repair damage while on orbit. Processes and procedures were also re-examined and reinvigorated. Crew safety would never again be taken for granted. Nearly 2.5 years would pass before the nation would see another orbiter poised for launch from the Kennedy Space Center.
By the time that we fly the flight, it's something that it feels like we have flown many times. So if things don't go well, it becomes very, very natural for us to know at certain points during the mission, if this doesn't go well or if this significant system breaks or we have this type of emergency, what's the most important thing we need to do now because we've been rehearsing it. And it makes it look really easy. You don't really get the full effect of how much real preparation, how much real studying went into making it look that easy.
Of all the changes accompanying the shuttle's return to flight, none was more significant than the one announced in early 2004 at NASA headquarters by President Bush.
Our first goal is to complete the International Space Station by 2010. We will finish what we have started. We will meet our obligations to our 15 international partners on this project. The shuttle's chief purpose over the next several years will be to help finish assembly of the International Space Station. In 2010, the Space Shuttle, after nearly 30 years of duty, will be retired from service.
Even though each shuttle was designed to fly 100 missions, the Columbia Accident Investigation Board called the shuttle an aging spacecraft with the odds of losing another orbiter and crew increasing with each subsequent flight. NASA's human spaceflight program was faced with several basic challenges, including coming up with a successor to the shuttle fleet. However, with an impending cancellation of the shuttle program looming, shuttle managers recommitted themselves to the paramount task of safely completing the International Space Station. It would become the program's mantra, to be repeated over and over again, not only to the media but also for every worker in the shuttle program. No launch schedule was too tight and no mission too important to be rushed.
We ought to treat every flight, in a sense, as a return to flight. This is truly a test program.
And since its return to flight, the shuttle program has been almost singularly focused on completing construction of the space station.
I think back of all the challenges and all the things that had to work right. You know, a lot of these interfaces never came together before. All the shuttle flights, the 20-plus shuttle flights that went into assembly, all the Soyuz flights, the Progress flights. To see this station come together in assembly is a true testimony to the international partnership. This is probably the most amazing research facility ever constructed in space, and it's constructed internationally, and it operates every day, 24 hours a day, doing world-class research internationally, and there is no more amazing facility than what we have in orbit.
Space Shuttle, you know, at this time was a vehicle for bringing people together from all around the planet and having us work in harmony for the betterment of humankind.
For more than 30 years, the fleet and thousands of Americans dedicated to its safety and success have toiled in exhilarating triumph, heartbreaking tragedy, and most often, quiet obscurity. Their contributions have extended beyond the bounds of space. Among others, shuttle-derived technologies have been used in developing an artificial heart and limbs, three-dimensional biotechnology, a light for treating tumors in children, and improving crime prevention and wildfire detection. From crawler driver to payload specialist, from scuba diver to pilot, from scientist to engineer, they and many like them throughout the nation share a commitment to sending humankind safely into space. That dedication, as much as any other acclaim, will be the legacy of America's space.